This hearing will come to order. I'd like to thank our witnesses for participating today. I'd also like to thank Ranking Member Tillis and his staff for working in a collaborative way to put this hearing together. And I'd like to welcome Senator Hirono. This is our fifth hearing of the IP subcommittee of this year. And Senator Tillis, you and your team continue to be great partners in moving forward. Just to set the stage more broadly on the focus of this hearing, online shopping has expanded dramatically, has exploded in recent years. Last year, U.S. e-commerce sales exceeded $1 trillion for the first time as millions and millions of Americans turned to online platforms from eBay to Amazon to find the brands they trust at prices they could afford. Counterfeiters, unfortunately, have moved online right alongside American consumers, and their tools are becoming far more sophisticated. Counterfeiters are no longer selling fake handbags or watches on a street corner or a flea market. New, modern online counterfeiting delivers products that look real, with listings featuring images that show the real product and fake reviews that make their knockoffs seem authentic. Online counterfeiting efforts are so successful that, according to one recent report, 2/3 of American consumers surveyed had unknowingly bought a counterfeit product online last year. This isn't just a matter of tricking consumers into spending their money on harmlessly fake products. As the CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol, warned earlier this year, fake goods can pose real dangers that put the health and safety of all Americans at risk. Fake lithium batteries, for example, batteries that power laptops, can explode or catch fire. They cause 70 deaths and 350,000 serious injuries in one recent year alone. Counterfeiters are also targeting airlines, trying to sell fake engine parts that have been demonstrated to increase the chances of a crash. And counterfeit prescription drugs sold to consumers online are at best ineffective and at worst, in some cases, deadly to those who purchase them. Now, if I unknowingly bought a fake laptop at my local Best Buy up on Concord Pike, and it then caught fire in my home, Best Buy would be liable for the harm to me and liable to the brand owner for contributing to trademark infringement. This framework for liability incentivizes brick and mortar stores to thoroughly and proactively vet their supply chains to keep counterfeit products out of consumers' hands. That same counterfeit battery bought online is met with a different liability framework. Platforms don't have the same proactive obligations. In fact, they need not remove a listing until a brand owner tells the platform specifically that the listing is counterfeit. The weight, the onus for policing online counterfeits is principally on brands, not platforms. Under this structure, brand owners have to play a never-ending game of whack-a-mole as they monitor a multiplying number of online marketplaces for counterfeit listings. Platforms know they have a counterfeit problem, and many have undertaken laudable anti-counterfeiting efforts. But current efforts are neither effective nor sufficient because the problem hasn't gone away. In fact, it is dramatically increasing. That's why I was proud to reintroduce the ShopSafe Act last week with Senator Tillis, a bill that works to try and balance the rights of brand owners and the obligations of online platforms to intercept and stop the sale of harmful counterfeit goods. The Act opens platforms to liability if counterfeit goods affecting health and safety are sold on the platforms, the same liability brick and mortar retailers have been subject to for decades. It requires brand owners to provide platforms with notice of their trademarks and a critical point of contact so platforms can proactively implement an articulated list of best practices to keep unsafe counterfeits out of consumers' online shopping carts. Those best practices include better vetting before goods are listed, quickly removing counterfeit listings, terminating repeat counterfeiters, and requiring accurate images of the products sold. Platforms that follow best practices will have a safe harbor from liability. In other words, platforms making genuine and good faith efforts to clean up their sites have and should enjoy a liability shield. Our reintroduction last week came after a fair amount of work in the last Congress, hearings in both 2019 and 2021 that highlighted the rise in anti-counterfeiting. It is not my anticipation that the bill introduced is perfect or final, and part of this hearing, those who both support and oppose this bill, is to welcome input, both critiques and compliments, in an effort to try and sharpen and shape the bill into something worthy of enactment. Since Senator Tillis and I first introduced ShopSafe, We've heard from stakeholders who would be impacted by the bill. I appreciate their efforts and the work we've done to make changes to the bill based on the feedback we've received so far. And I look forward to continuing to work with a broad range of stakeholders as we try to move this bill forward this year. With my ranking member's cooperation, we've assembled a panel today with a diverse range of views, and I'll introduce them in a moment. But first, let me turn to Ranking Member Tillis.
Thank you, Chairman Coons. Thank you for really just a series of great hearings on strengthening intellectual property rights and addressing many of the challenges. We have a lot of good with our intellectual property system. We have a lot of opportunities to make it even better. And I think when you're talking about counterfeit goods, it's really the worst of both worlds. Number one, somebody is ripping off intellectual property. Number two, they're doing it in a way that could be very dangerous. Which is why I'm glad we're having this hearing and taking concrete steps to actually address the problem. I can't get out of my mind, I've mentioned this story before, I'm an avid mountain biker. Actually, it's the reason why I got into politics. Accidentally, I just wanted a mountain bike trail, and next thing you know, I'm in the State House. But in this very room, just a few years ago, I have specialized products. You know, people have, depending upon your background, it's kind of like Chevy or Ford. So I'm a specialized consumer. And I saw a specialized helmet, clearly counterfeit, break under the weight of about a 180-pound person only jumping about a foot off the ground. Well, as somebody who's had 2 serious accidents in a specialized helmet, that helmet did what it was supposed to do. It cracked, but it didn't. It prevented me from getting a concussion or having any serious injuries. So I think that's just one example of several examples. We hear about them in automobile parts, in airplane parts. You see this in children's toys. That the official version may be safe. The counterfeit version is very dangerous. There's no question that we've got to fix this problem. And I think that the bill that we're going to have the hearing on today is a good first step, but it's never going to end. And we also have a lot of the same problems that we have with general intellectual property theft. It's falling on the back of the rights holder to figure out who is ripping off their intellectual property, what platform are they selling it on, and if you tell us, we'll take it down. That model does not work with the scale and the number of transactions that we're talking about. I wish that it could, but it simply doesn't work. So today, I hope this hearing gives us gives us additional information to get the stakeholders together so that we can come up with a reasonable compromise. I do know that there are some consequences that we want to avoid, and that's why we're going through the very thoughtful process that we go through today. But I'd find it hard to believe, Senator Coons, before you came down, I went and thanked the witnesses. I told them one of the reasons why I like this subcommittee so much is you don't really expect the witnesses to go after each other because they're so far apart. The nature of our hearings are more about how do you weave together a reasonable legislative fix that addresses some of the concerns that may exist on either side. So in this hearing today, I hope that we get that productive feedback, and I hope that those who are out there to kill this bill need to understand, I want you at the table to make it better. But if there's anyone out there that thinks that they're going to slow this down, then they probably need to think again. And if all you're here to do, and if all you're doing is watching to figure out how you stop this effort, then you're not at the table. That may put you on it. So let's work together, recognize the public safety, the intellectual property infringement challenges we have to deal with, and come together and work with us. And Senator Coons, again, I appreciate the years that you and I have worked together, and I especially appreciate how frequently Senator Hirono shows up for these subcommittee hearings, no matter what day it's on.
Go figure. No, you're both doing a good job. Thank you very much.
Senator, thank you for your persistent interest and engagement on the topics of this hearing. Ranking Member Tillis, thank you. Appreciate that introduction. I'll now briefly introduce our witness panel. We've assembled a panel to talk about strategies for protecting American families from unsafe counterfeit products sold in online platforms, and specifically to discuss the ShopSafe Act we just reintroduced. Our first witness is Carrie Camel, adjunct professor and director for education and outreach at Michigan State University, the Center for Anti-Counterfeiting and Product Protection, or ACAP, if I'm not mistaken. Ms. Camel, Professor Camel has written extensively on legal issues pertaining to counterfeiting on e-commerce platforms. Next, we have Daniel Shapiro, Senior VP of Brand Relationships at Red Points, a service business that helps brands police counterfeit goods offered for sale on online platforms, and who I think had a memorable weekend. Congratulations. Next, we have Steve Lamar, President and CEO of the American Apparel and Footwear Association, also a Delawarean, a trade association, the AAFA, representing more than 1,000 brands in the footwear and apparel industries, an industry at the top of the CBP's counterfeit seizure list. And last, we'll hear from Matt Shears, President of the Computer and Communications Industry Association, a trade association representing many different significant players, but in particular online platforms, including well-known and frequently in my home used platforms like Amazon and eBay. Welcome. So after I swear in these witnesses, each of you will have 5 minutes to provide an opening statement to the committee. Then we'll proceed to questioning, each senator having 5 minutes. And I would expect we'll take 2, maybe 3 rounds, given lots of things we need to talk about. So if you'd please stand. Would you raise your right hand and repeat after me? Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witnesses have been sworn in. Professor Camel, you may proceed with your opening statement.
Chair Coons, Ranking Member Tillis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify this afternoon on the Shop Safe Act, protecting families from counterfeits. I'm representing myself at today's hearing, and the views I express are my own. My remarks draw on my work at the ACAP Center, engaging with over 500 organizations and brand protection professionals on trademark counterfeiting, as well as leading multidisciplinary research teams, education, and outreach to examine this issue from an academic yet practical perspective. We know that the sale of counterfeit goods online impacts national economies, companies of all sizes, in particular small and medium-sized businesses, and consumers, and has exploded in the past decade, and particularly more since COVID-19. Counterfeiters find success by using another company or brand owner's trademark on a product or package without authorization to sell a fake and usually substandard or even dangerous good. They rely on the goodwill and reputation of that brand in order to make an illicit profit. Often counterfeiters are tied to other criminal activities, such as online fraud and organized crime. Many trademark owners struggle to get some platforms to respond to notice and takedown requests, or if they do, many find the whack-a-mole effect occurring with more postings taking their place. Particularly impacted are small and medium-sized businesses with their own products who do not have a dedicated brand protection team or department and have limited resources to commit to protecting their trademarks online. According to our multidisciplinary research, in order for a counterfeit to be sold to a consumer on an e-commerce platform, there must be a meeting in time and space of 1, the consumer, 2, the counterfeiter's posting, and 3, the e-commerce platform. The most effective way to disrupt this is to remove one of these factors from the situation proactively before they ever reach that meeting in time and place on the platform. Although the legal liability in the brick and mortar space provides contributory liability for trademark counterfeiting for service providers, such as flea markets or malls, when they haven't taken the steps to disrupt the sale of counterfeits to consumers in their space, we don't find the same parallel in the law in the e-commerce space. The current state of the law rests primarily on the 2010 Second Circuit case of Tiffany versus eBay, which notes that an e-commerce platform only needs to act if they have specific knowledge of a counterfeit posting from a brand, not constructive knowledge. There is no proactive requirement for platforms' prevention of counterfeit postings or monitoring of their own platforms for counterfeit, even though they have the most control over the platforms that they've created. Thus, an imbalance has evolved where brand owners and brand protection service providers attempt to take down counterfeit postings, but they cannot get at the root of the issue and are constantly chasing counterfeit postings online. Well-informed consumers will give some basic transparency to who is listed as a seller in these online transactions. More is needed. Results of a 17-country consumer survey that we completed last month note that in our study, nearly 66% of U.S. consumers surveyed bought counterfeits unintentionally, and 13.4% experienced a negative health effect after using a counterfeit product, and 15.6% experienced personal injury. 68% of those surveyed said they'd bought counterfeits on either e-commerce or social media platforms. And additionally, our findings show that the consumers do not see a clear mechanism on what to do when they discover they have bought a counterfeit. These findings reflect what I know from my engagement with IP rights holders across industries, companies, and even product lines. The number one challenge right now relates to third-party sellers of counterfeit online. On a personal note, despite working in this field for some time, even my family is impacted by counterfeit goods. Just a few weeks ago in September, my mother, who is a 72-year-old retired public school teacher, was informed that a vitamin that she ordered on an e-commerce platform that allows third-party sellers was counterfeit, and she had been taking it for several months and experienced negative health effects. While she did get a refund, the communication from the platform was confusing, and she was told conflicting messages that she could dispose of it or even give it away or donate it. My mother's experience is reflective of what I've heard from IP rights holders in regard to their consumers and others and the risks of third-party sellers of counterfeit, and it's not limited to one particular platform or product. So my recommendations are to continue to address the ever-growing sale of counterfeit goods by third-party sellers in online marketplaces through the Shop Safe Act, and to support continued and expanded collaborations between academia and other stakeholders. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Professor Kimmel. Mr. Shapiro.
Thank you, Chairman Coons and Ranking Member Tillis, and the esteemed members of the committee for inviting me to be here today. A quick overview of Redpoints. We are a technology company that's helping making the internet safer for both brands and consumers. We use AI technology to detect and remove hundreds, if not thousands, of marketplaces around the world. I began working in this space some 13 years ago while working at eBay, specifically working with some of the world's largest brands to combat this problem, which is obviously significant. In recent years, we have witnessed an unprecedented rise in e-commerce, offering consumers convenience and variety like never before. This, like everything, brings life into life, both opportunities and challenges. This boom has attracted counterfeiters who exploit these platforms, endangering consumer safety, tarnishing brand reputation, and causing considerable economic loss. Contrary to popular belief, online counterfeit is not restricted to luxury goods. Counterfeiters do not discriminate when selling fake product online. They can target industries, and they can target any brand regardless of their size. We are talking about everything from baby products, cosmetics, automotive, fashion, and even industrial equipment like wind turbines get counterfeited. In the context of back-to-school shopping, students and parents are particularly vulnerable to counterfeit electronics, backpacks, clothing, footwear, as these are essential for the upcoming academic year. Some of these products may not be harmful, but rather extremely poor quality, which takes hard-earned money out of families because they have to rebuy these products before the end of the academic year. As a testament to this, Redpoints, we witnessed over 1,000% increase in the detected counterfeit incidences for the brands in which we represent over the year 2022 versus 2021. For a reference, Redpoints today serves over 1,200 brands who rely on our platform to combat online fraud, which provide us with a vast amount of valuable information. Last year alone, we processed over 35 million links per day and safeguarded over $2.2 billion in potential revenue loss for our clients. These statistics underscore the depth and challenge before us. The sophistication of online scams continue to evolve, with fraudsters harnessing technologies, creating websites, mastering social engineering, and the battle against these ever-adapting threats resembles the well-known, as Chairman Coons mentioned, the well-known game of whack-a-mole. As we delve into the complexities of counterfeiting in the digital age, it is crucial to consider the existing response of online platforms, marketplaces, brands, legislative actions, and even third-party providers like Redpoints. Are all of us aligned? Are we collaborating well enough to combat this sort of greater evil? After all, the target here is in fact the criminals who are exploiting both the marketplaces and the consumers. Now, many e-commerce platforms have been ramping up their anti-counterfeiting initiatives in recent years in efforts to rid their sites of knockoffs. However, scammers are continually looking for bigger audiences to sell to. The rapid year-over-year growth of e-commerce users has offered a unique opportunity for bad actors to expand their operations and further challenge of combating counterfeits as they persist due to the adaptability and persistence of criminal organizations. Brands, regardless of their size, find it challenging to address all the infringing images of their intellectual property. To effectively combat online counterfeits, brands must prioritize, must invest, and implement a clear online brand protection strategy. Not having an online brand protection strategy today has grave consequences for both its brand itself and its consumers, particularly in the area of detection and enforcement. This can be made even more challenging based on the distribution decisions made by their company's business teams. However, when it comes to the fight against counterfeits, in our opinion, the path forward is collaboration. This is not an issue that can be solved by one stakeholder. It is a shared responsibility and needs a united front of industries, marketplaces, third-party providers, and legislative action to ensure a secure e-commerce environment. Collaboration amplifies our resources, amplifies our data and expertise, and our response is greater than the sum of its parts. It is our hope that the legal system will continue to hold sellers liable for the sale of counterfeit product online, as they do for brick-and-mortar retailers, and we welcome ongoing dialogue in the brand protection community and legislation to find the best practices to tackle this online counterfeiting problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. Mr. Lamar.
Thank you, Chairman Coons, Ranking Member Tillis, and members of the subcommittee. Nobody wants to buy clothes, shoes, or accessories that will sicken their kids, or that were made by forced labor, or that were produced in sweatshops, or that destroy the environment. But that's exactly what happens when consumers are duped into buying counterfeit fashion. And that's why the Shop Safe Act is so important for Congress to consider and pass. The members of AFA invest millions to build, train, and inspect supply chains to ensure that the clothes, shoes, and accessories bought and worn by American families are not only fashionable and affordable, but are also ethically and sustainably sourced and made and are safe for consumers. This is an area of continuous improvement, as each day we're looking further back in our supply chains and implementing increasingly complicated transparency, traceability, and product safety requirements to make sure that the clothes and shoes and accessories used by everybody in this room and everybody in this country are responsibly made. On top of their considerable investment in social and ethical compliance, U.S. brands and retailers of all sizes spend considerable resources to police third-party marketplaces, try to remove shady websites, take down fraudulent ads in a mission to address the growing counterfeit problem and protect consumers. Counterfeit products not only harm our members' reputations and hurt their sales, but they also put our members' customers in harm's way with fake products that could sicken them or create other risks. We're part of a broad industry coalition supporting the Shop Safe Act, spanning diverse sectors of the economy that have been raising alarms about the growing danger posed by counterfeits that are too easily allowed into our front steps and into our living rooms. While headlines scream about the dangers of counterfeit airbags, batteries, and prescriptions, the dangers posed by counterfeits are everywhere, including apparel, footwear, accessories, toys, personal care products, and more. In 2022, AFA commissioned a study of 47 counterfeit clothes, shoes, and other accessories. These were everyday items that we would wear or use daily, and we found that 17 of these products, just over 36%, had dangerously high levels of poisonous materials like lead, arsenic, and phthalates. Not only did these items fail U.S. safety rules, but they also could have made consumers seriously ill if they had bought or used them. To say that counterfeits kill is not an exaggeration. Counterfeiters have a different view of the world. Their entire business model is based on stealing somebody else's innovation and identity. So it is with little remorse that they exploit workers, engage in wage theft, employ shoddy factories, dump hazardous waste into rivers and lakes, and use dangerous chemicals. When they lure folks into buying their fake products, they often dabble in more thievery, exposing consumers to financial scams. The fact that authentic brands invest so much in social and ethical effort only widens the profit margins of counterfeiters, since they are often able to score a sale without paying for any of the compliance that they are duping customers into believing that has occurred. What happens to the profit of these ill-gotten gains? They become the seed capital for organized crime, terrorist activities, and yet more counterfeit activity. Protecting consumers, businesses, and American jobs from counterfeits has been and should be a bipartisan issue. And like many, we celebrate the growth of the e-commerce environment and cherish the opportunities the internet has created to enable consumers to interact with our industry and to enable our industry to thrive, especially during the pandemic. But with great opportunity comes great responsibility, and that's why the accountability and proactive measures required by ShopSafe are vital. U.S. law contains many guardrails to make sure brick-and-mortar retailers of all sizes do not sell counterfeit items. Authentic brands don't have to visit every store across the country to make sure that these brick-and-mortar locations are only selling legitimate goods. They don't have to go through lengthy takedown fights with these physical stores, only to find fake goods pop up, again, shielded by a new name. In the online world, things are very different. Brands must monitor every platform out there with new platforms popping up every day. And when brands find counterfeits, fake websites, dupe influencers, or fraudulent ads promoting these websites, they must beg and fight the platforms to get those products, ads, and websites removed. If the platform removes them at all, it can be weeks or months, all the time allowing the counterfeiters to profit, and often the infringers pop up within days. We can't think it's simply okay to let brands and retailers shoulder the burden and monitor these websites. Inefficient at best and Sisyphean at worst, this is likened to a game of whack-a-mole because counterfeiters are a wily bunch. They are pioneers in the latest technology and are constantly developing creative approaches to evade detection, knowing also that the legal framework that is deployed to stop them has been rapidly outpaced by the internet itself. They also know that many third-party marketplaces can hide within that framework, avoiding responsibility for the fake goods they allow to be sold. Interestingly, some of the same platforms that end up hosting counterfeiters are themselves pioneering amazing technological advancements that can put up more effective roadblocks against illicit actors. Many of them talk about zero tolerance for counterfeits, a value that is commendable. But we've been hearing that for years while the counterfeit epidemic has been allowed to flourish, while these actions now are insufficient. It's now time to update and create stronger federal incentives appropriate for the e-commerce ecosystems and consistent with what we have in the physical world. So ShopSafe will do just that, holding third-party online platforms accountable so they will be incentivized to make the necessary changes. And if these platforms take common sense, easily achievable steps like asking sellers for key pieces of needed information, implementing proactive measures for screening listings before displaying the goods, and denying the platform to repeat infringers, they will clean up their own sites and achieve safe harbor from the legislation's tough liability provisions, not provide safe harbor for dangerous fake goods. Thank you for inviting us to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lamar. Mr. Shears.
Chairman Coons, Ranking Member Tillis, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your time today. My name is Matt Shears. I'm president of the Computer and Communications Industry Association. CCIA has advocated on technology policy for over 50 years. I'm pleased to be here today to talk about protecting consumers online. Keeping consumers and communities safe online and safe from dangerous products is a broadly shared goal. Responsible services, including CCIA members, invest significant resources in protecting users from illegal and unsafe goods, while engaging extensively with brand owners to identify and report to law enforcement counterfeit products. This is why CCIA, many online marketplaces, and retailers jointly endorsed and supported the Informed Consumers Act that was passed last year. This law has been in effect for less than 100 days. We should give time for Informed to work before judging whether or not additional legislative interventions are required. CCIA has concerns about S-2934, the recently reintroduced ShopSafe Act. This concept was previously opposed by dozens of civil society groups, businesses, associations, and legal scholars for good cause. Fighting counterfeits requires substantial cooperation between brand owners and retailers. Existing law recognizes that trademark owners are in the best position to accurately and efficiently identify counterfeit goods from authentic goods. ShopSafe places major new burdens and liabilities on sellers of all sizes while requiring no significant new contribution from brand owners. In fact, the new version of ShopSafe deletes a section from the previous version that would have cracked down on bogus trademark challenges. And the legislation's public notice requirements actually burden smaller retailers more than large ones. And shifting these legal responsibilities through new liability rules is not going to prevent counterfeiting, but it would stifle legitimate commerce and innovation and reduce ongoing cross-sector cooperation. Marketplaces and the vast majority of small sellers operate legitimately, and we should not place unreasonable compliance burdens on businesses of any size, but particularly not small and medium-sized businesses. These sellers lack the bandwidth and the resources to spend multiple days investigating putative concerns from brands when the trademark owner is in possession of the information that will help them identify counterfeits. That definition, incidentally, turns on non-public information about whether or not a good was manufactured under license. The burdens of ShopSafe fall broadly. The scope of the statute's definitions is incredibly expansive. It defines electronic commerce platform as far broader than marketplaces, encompassing virtually every online forum where people could connect. And the bill presumes that any such site is liable for infringement and requires it to prove its innocence by mandating compliance with prescriptive requirements to escape what is effectively strict liability. ShopSafe also employs an expansive definition of good that implicates health and safety. That definition would encompass virtually every product in today's consumer household. And finally, while the bill is framed as a safe harbor, it is in fact an unsafe harbor. It flips on its head standard notions of liability in favor of a novel, strict contributory liability scheme whereby if a service does not adhere to a set of obligations that are not accurately characterized as best practice, then they will be held liable. So in summary, we recommend that the Senate seek updated data on the efficacy of Inform before moving forward on an unbalanced proposal that is not going to solve the problem it purports to address, but would place substantial regulatory burdens on small businesses, on e-commerce providers, and on retailers. Ultimately, we recommend that Congress approach retail regulation in its totality. Brick and mortar e-commerce, big box, bodega, mom and pop stores, all the same, should be regulated under a coherent model that applies to businesses equally. And this, we believe, will provide a better path forward. I thank you for the invitation today. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shears, and thank you to all the witnesses. Let me just open where we concluded there, Professor Campbell. You testified that there's a different liability standard, different approach for brick and mortar stores versus online platforms. Mr. Shears concluded by saying we should have one approach, one common approach to how we regulate commerce, online, large, small, brick and mortar. Help me understand. Square that circle for me. Doesn't ShopSafe try to apply a similar liability standard online as already exists in brick and mortar, or do I misunderstand?
So in my opinion, it does attempt to do a similar contributory liability in the e-commerce space. So in the brick and mortar space, and we've seen that through several cases starting back in 1992 with Hard Rock versus Concession Services before the Seventh Circuit, that people who were running flea markets or landlords, they were considered service providers. They were responsible for reasonably looking around their property to determine if counterfeiting was taking place or other activities. So what happened with the Tiffany versus eBay case, and in a few other cases too, is the court decided at that time, which again is about 13 years ago, that it was unreasonable for an e-commerce platform to be able to look through their own platform to find these postings. And I think we've seen through the changes in technology, particularly AI and machine learning, that has shifted. And it's no longer unreasonable for a platform to be able to see what's on its own platform, but also to vet proactively sellers and those postings and the images that are going up to make sure once something's posted is actually safe for the consumer to purchase.
Mr. Lamar, one of the things that ShopSafe would do, one of the attempts at definitions for sort of best practices to define a safe harbor would be to have a standardized set of, if you do these things, you would avoid any contributory liability. Your members sell their products on all different platforms, all different sizes. You have small, medium, and very large companies selling on platforms of all different sizes. Each of these platforms have different rules, different programs, different approaches to addressing counterfeiting, some laudable and very sophisticated and engaged, some virtually not at all. Would it benefit brand owners to have a standardized menu that says, this is the kind of cooperation you need to provide to platforms?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Senator. There is a lack of consistency about what exists. We've actually created tools to kind of tell people, our members, when you go to this platform, here are the things you can experience. When you go to this platform, here are the things you can experience. And it would be much better if there were very clear, simple federal guidelines. If you want to do business in this country, here's the way you need to approach the U.S. consumer. And create that very common sense set of proactive. Right now it is reactive, it is after the fact, and it is inconsistent. So something that actually creates a very common central approach is exactly what we need.
Mr. Shears, you said Shop Safe. You have a number of criticisms of it. One is that it puts no new obligations on brands. What would you suggest as, in your view, one of the most important things we could do to achieve a better balance of responsibilities and liabilities online?
So thanks for that. Thanks for that. The bill as it stands indicates that information sharing should occur, but then states that it's not necessary, effectively, if information about trademarks is publicly available online, which is effectively every trademark by virtue of the fact that all of this information is available through the Patent and Trademark Office website. So the statute, as it presently stands, creates a null set. It regulates 0 companies. What we would want to see is an obligation on brand owners to share more granular information about products and provide information about, for example, new products being introduced, imagery that they have that's legitimate, and whether or not that's been licensed. But it's important to sort of step back and recognize that the Trademark Act currently defines counterfeit as products. It requires a definition that is whether or not the product has been manufactured under license, and that is information that only the brand owner has. And so having availability to that information would go a long way towards allowing e-commerce platforms to implement the kinds of sort of takedown requests that they're getting.
Thank you, Mr. Shears. Mr. Shapiro, uniquely you sit sort of in the middle of all this, mediating oceans of data going back and forth between brands and platforms. I think you said 35 million incidents a year.
A day.
A day, right, a day. So it's only today with modern technology, with AI, with incredibly capable technology that we can begin to examine and process things like whether this image is a trademarked and protected image of the actual product or it is something fake. How would you strike the balance here between putting more obligations on trademark holders, licensors, and putting more obligations on platforms?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a combination of a lot of challenges coming together today. Today in marketplaces around the world, my former company I work with, somewhere I read online recently that there was 1.7 billion listings currently available. Amazon is probably double or triple that. Alibaba is probably adding close to 1 billion items a day in a conference that I was at not too long ago in terms of suggesting that's how many listings. I certainly can't verify about it. That's just what I heard. But at that volume, the ability for brands to monitor that on their own, impossible. Today, unless you deploy some level of technology, you can't get there. And with platforms today, with that many listings on their sites, and with brands having 2 and 3 million SKUs, there are some very big brands with lots of SKUs. There probably isn't one person in the company that knows every product in which they make. And so when we deal with brand protection teams at a particular brand, they're often an IP legal counsel, very sophisticated in the world of IP, but they work for a company with 1 million SKUs. They don't know which items are authentic and which are counterfeit. If they've only been there a year, they might not even know of the product previously that was out there.
Understood. What suggestions might you have for us about how to better balance the obligations of brands and
Yes, so I think to answer your question then, I think that there has to be an investment from the brands to help, right? There's the unwillingness today to share too much information with platforms because there's a lack of trust with the platforms that if they told them their intellectual property, that maybe somehow that would get to a counterfeiter. So if today we could get
In other
brands,
words, if brands are required to get well into the granularity of how to make their product, not just have we registered the
Yes,
trademark, are we making it under license, but exactly all the schematics and the details and the
yes, and that's
there
how
are,
we
in
work.
fact, actions against some platforms for manufacturing.
Exactly.
competitive
And that's how we work. They share with us their IP. We use that IP to crawl and find that product. And we keep that. We don't share that with the platform, but we have that, right? So that's the first step of trying to solve this, is a bit more comfortable level of sharing that IP and sort of trusting one another that we could do this together if we think about a good common place on how to do it.
Thank you. I need to yield to my ranking member, Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I hope you don't take or didn't take my comments earlier about people who are opposed to the bill that we're talking today as being bad people. I just see a bad pattern of behavior here that we need to fix.
Yes.
And I hear your comments about the Inform Act, but let's assume that Inform Act performs at 100% of its wildest expectations. Is the problem solved?
Well, I think this problem will never be solved. It is an ongoing process by
Well,
which...
it bend the curve. See,
I-
to me, it just seems like it's indisputable that this is growing, and bad actors, particularly China, I should have mentioned that in my opening comments. Look, there are a variety of strategic, economic, health, and safety reasons why we need to be attacking this. China being first among them. I've seen far too many instances of North Carolina-based companies where they've been victims of counterfeit goods. I'm not here to attack you, but I am here to because we're going to go to a second round. I'm going to yield to Senator Blackburn here fairly quickly so that she can ask, and then I'll come back around. I want to find out more about the 35 million links a day, the methodology being used for that, what the trending is. I also want to understand a little bit more about the 17-country survey. I think, Professor Campbell, you may have mentioned that. I'll get back to specific suggestions, but right now I'm going to defer to Senator Blackburn, if I may.
Of course. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank Senator Tillis. Welcome. We're delighted that you all are here. I represent Tennessee, and in Tennessee, we have looked at this issue of copyright and patent infringements for years. And it doesn't matter if it is auto parts or aftermarket auto parts. It doesn't matter if it is guitars or clothing or shoes, baseballs, ink pens. Those are all items that have come to us, and they've been knocked off by a factory over in China. And then that brand name is grabbed, and this counterfeit merchandise is sold under that brand name. And Mr. Shapiro, you mentioned how difficult it is to track and how difficult it is to find these, and that due diligence needing to be done as you crawl the web and try to search out these items. Mr. Schurz, let me come to you. Senator Tillis was talking about the impact of the Inform Act. So answer that in a more fulsome way. As we look at Shop Safe, should we wait for the Inform Act and see how far we're going to get there? Because, this issue has been around for a long time. And it started out, and it was knocking off designer clothing and handbags and music and videos and movies. And then you saw it creep into other areas. So let's talk about what you think the merit and the impact of the Inform Act could be or should be.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we have had Inform in force for barely 3 months, and we have yet to see its full effect. Retail, of course, is seasonal and cyclical, and so we would want to spend some time collecting data before we can see its full impact and assess whether or not it's doing what we need it to do. But we know that a lot of counterfeiters and bad actors online operate by obscuring information. And of course, inform creates greater transparency, encourages, compels platforms to collect and verify and disclose information from high-volume sellers. It also creates a mechanism for individuals to report suspicious transactions. These mechanisms have barely been available to the public, and we should give them time. I think we should also acknowledge that what is best practice is an evolving standard, right, and from which we should determine by talking to the practitioners. And we can see that technology is regularly being deployed in this place where it can. But at the end of the day, we need cooperation. We need brand owners and platforms working hand in glove because...
Well, and I think we need platforms to be more diligent in pulling things that they suspect are counterfeit.
I think we should acknowledge that there are millions of legitimate transactions online every day, and the vast, vast majority of platforms, of e-commerce providers and small sellers are legitimate actors engaged in lawful commerce. That being said, there is a very small sliver of bad actors out there who we need to take action against. And online platforms don't want to be associated with these transactions any more than brand owners want them to happen. These are bad experiences for consumers, and nobody wants to be associated with selling a dangerous good. The question is, how do we get there? And we need to get there through cooperation because, as the bill currently stands, the parties who have the obligation to act actually have the least information in this transaction, and we need to fix that problem.
I was talking with someone in Tennessee, and they were talking about using Etsy and putting something that they had created on Etsy. And they were trying to get a patent on this. And they said, my concern is I'm going to put it up, and then it's going to be knocked off before I have the ability to actually commercialize on this. So how do we use the INFORM Act? How do we fight this proliferation of counterfeit goods and not harm these small manufacturers, these small entities that have a great idea or a great product? They're trying to move it into commercialization, but they're afraid of what will happen if they go online.
I think that's a great question. And obviously, different platforms provide different services, and so I can't speak to any one specific platform, but I think it bears noting that these platforms are often the first vehicle by which small sellers and entrepreneurs like this constituent you're referring to are able to reach a worldwide audience. And but for access to a platform that allows them to ship across the country and around the world, they simply wouldn't have the ability to scale beyond their community. And so we don't want to impose obligations on either the platform or these individuals that cannot be sustained and that might have the effect of driving someone like this small entrepreneur out of the marketplace.
Yes, and thank you for that. And I see my time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Hirono, are you prepared to question? Having just returned from an important ceremony, I'm happy to ask a question if you'd like for a moment while you...
It's okay. Thank you very much.
Please proceed.
So this is for Ms. Kamel. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? So this has to do with some definitions. So your research center has a helpful glossary on its website that defines the action of counterfeiting generally as, and I quote, to forge, copy, or initiate something without a right to do so and with the purpose of deceiving or defrauding, end quote. And the federal definition is different, but starts with a spurious mark, meaning one that is not genuine or authentic. So as we deal with this issue of counterfeiting, do we need to have a better definition of what constitutes counterfeiting? Because we're not talking about those instances where someone goes and buys something at a discount, a genuine article at a discount, and then proceeds to sell that item for a lesser price. That is not counterfeiting, is it?
That's correct. I do not believe it is, and thank you for your question. While that definition under the glossary is meant to be descriptive, I would refer back to the definition in the Lanham Act or in the Trademark Counterfeiting Act about the spurious mark. We believe that is what legally defines what a counterfeit mark is.
So the focus of this bill, I think, has to do with items that can be deemed, that can compromise the health and safety of the user. And I think the definition in the bill is very broad, isn't it? Have you had a chance to review the bill?
I have, yes. You're referring to the health and safety provision?
Yes. And doesn't the bill pretty much refer to those kinds of items that compromise or endanger health and safety, that's what we're getting at? But the bill's definition is quite broad. It could be anything, pretty much, from what I read. So do we need to better define what we mean by the compromising or whatever, the health and safety?
Thank you for that question. So my understanding is that it implicates a counterfeit good, which in itself would impact health and safety. And as we know, and as several of my colleagues here have testified, we know that goods that, if they are legitimate, may not implicate health and safety, but if they are counterfeit, they can. And a lot of people are often surprised by that when, we get asked the question, what's the harm in purchasing this counterfeit? There's nothing wrong with it. And we know from a lot of testing, for example, that there can be lead or, poisonous materials that were made in these products. So from my perspective, the fact that it says that a good that implicates health and safety would encompass a counterfeit that could endanger a person's health and safety. And we see that across industries, across product lines.
Well, the definition is really broad, and that's why I have some concerns about just about anything can compromise or endanger someone's health and safety. For Mr. Lamar, you testified that over a third of the counterfeit clothes that you tested in a case study contained dangerous substances. Did you get into what kind of substances these are?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. Your microphone. Thank you for the question, Senator. They contained high levels of dangerous chemicals like cadmium and lead and phthalates. They also had other product safety failures that have been associated with injuries, buttons coming off, other kinds of things, drawstrings that the industry that is pushing for compliance go to great lengths to make sure that they meet those requirements. And so counterfeiters that are not going through, in addition to creating products that do have a health and safety issue, even though you might not think of it with an article of clothing, they do have a very obvious one. They also those counterfeiters get a benefit because they're selling something at roughly the same price, even though they don't have to go through the expenditure of the expensive compliance and testing and so forth.
Which leads me to question where these counterfeit products are coming from. Are they associated with certain countries that do not have to abide by health and safety considerations?
Many of them come from China, and interestingly, in China, a lot of those same health and safety considerations exist as well. We lead compliance programs in China to educate factories on that as well. What's happening is the counterfeiters are ignoring everyone's health and safety. They're not putting anyone's first, so they're ignoring the US laws, they're ignoring Chinese laws, they're ignoring laws in other countries as well.
So does the bill that the chair and ranking member filed, will they help to get at these counterfeit products that are made in foreign countries such as China?
Absolutely, yeah.
How so?
We definitely think it'll put any counterfeiter on notice. It will also create a set of very proactive steps that will be taken to make sure that the goods don't even get offered to U.S. consumers in the first place. So we deny the market to the counterfeiters, so the financial incentive for the counterfeiters to even start down the path immediately dries up.
Just one more question, Mr. Chairman. So how do we get at these counterfeiters if they're not even in our country? I assume that these goods are somehow, that they're being sold by entities that are in China, for example. How do we even get jurisdiction over those folks?
One of the proactive measures, a set of proactive measures that's in ShopSafe talks about establishing jurisdiction for these individual companies through the platform. So that's a measure that we don't have right now that would be a huge improvement.
Does a country have to, country of origin, i.e. China, have to accept our jurisdiction over their people?
No, but the entities that are doing business with these platforms would.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Let me, if I could, just Professor Kimmel, could you just briefly and concisely summarize the difference between the Inform Act and ShopSafe and why both might be necessary and what impact it would have on the contours of ShopSafe if we let Inform go for a couple of years and then sort of see what the impact is?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Senator. From my perspective, they're complementary, but they're not the same. So the Inform Act briefly requires e-commerce platforms to get seller information and to verify that in advance and to share some of that information with the consumer at the latest time at the point of receipt of purchase so that they can get that information. That's very helpful because currently some platforms do not even share seller information at all, and that's kept sort of behind the wall that the e-commerce platform can see, but the consumers cannot.
So in the case of your mother who purchased counterfeit or faulty vitamins online that actually harmed her, she'd now have some information on record on the online platform about where it came from.
She has a name and an address, correct.
And that's it?
That's it.
Okay. And then what's the difference in the bill we're discussing today?
So with ShopSafe, we are talking about reasonable measures that platforms can take that my colleagues here have already been discussing, particularly proactively. So from our perspective, at least with our research, this is one of the important things to really disrupt the sale of goods online is that proactive measures need to take place, and those are listed throughout the ShopSafe bill. And if those proactive measures take place, and that's reasonable depending on the size of the e-commerce platform and the resources and technology, then they have a safe harbor. If they're not willing to do that proactively, then they can be liable for secondary liability for trademark counterfeiting in a similar way that a brick and mortar store might, such as a shopping mall or a flea market, which we've talked about.
And one issue all of you have raised is the potential impact on small businesses. There's a threshold below which potential company is not covered.
Correct.
A platform.
Correct. So $500,000 from my understanding. And I think it's important to point out, too, we're talking in some ways about small businesses, but from two different perspectives, I believe. So there's the small business who is selling others' products, and then there's the small business who's the intellectual property rights holder, which I believe Senator Blackburn was referring to, that they work really hard, they get this great idea, they go to register their IP, and e-commerce is a great place for them to start a business and sell, particularly if they're in a small town or somewhere where they might not have access to a lot of consumers. Many of them find very quickly that their product's being counterfeited, and because they're a small company, maybe 1 to 2 people, that they don't have brand protection resources to do massive amounts of searching the web looking for the counterfeiters.
One last question to you, and then I'll yield to my ranking member. There's a difference on this panel about how big an issue this is. ACAP took a survey of thousands of consumers and came up with the conclusion that 2/3 of all American customers had unwittingly purchased a counterfeit item online. Given the volume of online transactions, I think it was $1 trillion last year, that's an enormous dollar value and number. CBP reports roughly $3 billion in interdicted counterfeits. That's a relatively small number compared to the volume. Help me understand, how big of an issue do you think this is? Mr. Shears has said a very small sliver in a sea of otherwise completely legitimate transactions. The truth, I suspect, is somewhere in between. And I don't mean to mischaracterize Mr. Shears. I'll give you a chance to also share. How big a problem is this? Why is it deserving of legislative attention?
So this is a great question, and it is challenging to get an exact number, and you pointed out a lot of the sources for data that we know that we can get a hold of from customs to takedowns on the brand side or such as my colleague Mr. Shapiro's side. They see how many counterfeit postings are out there. We also know from organizations such as the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, give a lot of estimates ranging in 2.5% of global GDP is counterfeit sales. Some other organizations, such as Frontier Economics, have also published studies saying now that the problem of counterfeit goods financially has surpassed that of the global drug trade and human trafficking. So we know it's a major problem.
Let me just,
yes.
I'm just going to hang on a second. More money, according to this source, is generated in the sale of counterfeit goods than in drugs or selling and moving people.
That is what this study says, yes.
Okay, interesting. Mr. Shears?
Thank you for the opportunity to address this. Let me start by saying there's no dispute that this is a problem that needs attention.
Right.
We're just talking about the scale of the problem. And I would note that all of these statistics that we're looking at are, by their own terms, wildly inflated relative to the problem that we're talking about. So first of all, many of them are the upper range. And so we get a sight of between X and Y is the top figure, and then Y becomes the figure. So we need to realize that the outer bound is not the median figure. Secondly, most of these figures apply and include copyright piracy, patent infringement. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that infringement in foreign markets that have weak rule of law is a serious policy problem. That is not the problem that we're talking about here. This bill is not going to do anything about pirated software in China. It's not going to prevent patent infringement. It's not going to prevent a physical sale of a bootleg handbag on the street of Moscow, right? This is just about regulating online platforms. And those numbers are wildly over-inclusive based on what we're talking about here. So I think we have to take these numbers with many grains of salt. Having said that,
Speak to Professor Campbell's study suggesting 2/3 of American consumers may have unwittingly purchased a counterfeit item.
Yeah, I don't want to speak specifically about the methodology of that study. I think what I would say is we know the vast majority of these transactions are legitimate by legitimate businesses who just want to make consumers happy with their products. And so the question is, how do we do that? How do we facilitate all of these lawful transactions while dealing with this small sliver of bad actors?
Mr. Shapiro, to close out this round, is Redpoint's a very small startup with a handful of customers? No. Your reference to 35 million was 35 million what?
New listings a day we bring into our platform on behalf of the brands we represent.
35 million new listings of?
Listings that are need to be reviewed for being suspicious of counterfeits.
And what percentage of them do you ultimately conclude have any basis to be deemed counterfeit?
It's a small...
Purveyors of counterfeit.
Yeah, it's a small number. Today, it's not a small number, but I'll tell you today we send out somewhere...
That's exactly my question. Is it a small number?
300,000 to 400,000 notice and takedowns per month on behalf of our customers. So we represent 1,200 customers. We're sending out almost 400,000 notices every single month on behalf of those customers.
To wrap this up, you have 1,200 customers.
Correct.
How many members do you have, Mr. Lamar?
About 350, representing between 1,000 and 1,200 famous brands.
And you're one small segment of every industry that sells online.
The ShopSafe Coalition, if you can make it, you can counterfeit it, and it represents all sectors of the economy.
Mr. Shapiro, any general observation about whether the scale of counterfeit activity online is increasing, stable, or decreasing? To the point my colleague made, how do we bend the curve without killing what is one of the most popular and efficient? And I mean, if it weren't for Amazon, my household would cease to function. A truck pulls up every day and disgorges more products.
Money in my bank account.
Yes, it is growing. I mentioned in my testimony that year over year, our counterfeits have increased. Our detections on behalf of our customers, they're up 1,003%. I said, 103%. I said 100%, but it's about 103% growth over 1 year. It is growing at a substantial rate, without question.
Let me conclude this round by just saying, and then defer to Senator Tillis, I hear across all four of you that cooperation and collaboration between platforms and brands is critical. our proposed legislation shifts the incentives in a way that tries to come up with a liability framework that is common across brick and mortar and online platforms. I recognize differences of opinion about whether it underperforms or overperforms. I look forward to active engagement as we move forward. Senator Tillis.
Yeah, Mr. Shapiro, I was actually going to follow up along the same lines that Senator Coons did. I think, it's amazing. I bought a counterfeit good. The minute I opened the box, I threw it away. It turned out to be like a Dremel ripoff, but it looked like something that was going to suit the task that I had for the weekend. My daughter thought she bought a pair of Nikes that looked like crap when she opened up the box. It took her forever to get a refund. Your mother, I get, because of the sheer volume of transactions, it looks pretty small, but it's touched more than half of probably the consumers in the United States today. So it's a problem that touches all of us. It's bad enough when you're ripping off intellectual property. It's worse when you get into the health and safety factors. We've got to do something to fix it. So I'm going to move into like a debate round here, which I do from time to time. It's another reason why I love this committee. Number one, is there any jurisdiction that's gotten this right? Should we just be filling in the blanks by saying do just what fill in the blank country has done? Are there any emerging best practices out there that we should follow? Or the converse, is there an overreach that's been very, very disruptive to your members, CCIA members? I mean, who's getting it right? Who's gotten it wrong? What do we need to learn from it? And we'll start with you, Professor Camel.
Thanks for the question. So in my perspective, so far, no one has it exactly right. I think a lot of different areas are grappling with
Has anybody gotten it kind of wrong, Mr. Scheer?
Similar issue.
Well, I think what I would say is the approach that we have had thus far is as close to getting things right as we can see. And the fact of the matter is that the thriving e-commerce sector is located in the United States. And that's not an accident. And it's quite possible that a ill-considered policy decision could dry up that marketplace, right? And that means impacting not only U.S. businesses, but all the small businesses.
And nobody wants that to happen. Mr.
Right.
Shapiro, the business that you're engaged in, you made a very important point that a part of the way that you're able to identify potential infringements is because proprietary data is shared with you all that you use in order to crawl the internet, find potential suspicious offerings?
Correct.
And how long has it been in business?
We've been operating since 2014.
So with the fundamental technology absent the data that your customers, 1,200 or so customers, are willing to share with you, is that the only difference between the analytics you can do and the analytics that most of these platforms should be doing anyway?
Well, I came from a platform, so I know there's technology there.
That's why I was
know
asking.
that they're doing things every single day. I'm assuming it's a lot better since I left 6 years ago. I can tell you ours is a lot better today than it was 6 years ago. So certainly the technology is allowing us to find things. Here's the challenge. I've been at this thing for 13 years. Sometimes when we have a new customer sign up and I look at what we're going to protect, I look at it and go, are you kidding me? They're counterfeiting that? Most people who work for platforms don't have a very big brand breadth of knowledge. And so if you've never seen this pen before, you may never know that it's actually a brand, right? So it's a challenge for platforms to think about how to protect that when they didn't know it was a brand. And you might argue someone in the company might know it's a brand, but not everybody knows it's a brand. So for us, when brands hire us and share that intimate intellectual property knowledge, we can deploy all sorts of technology from logo recognition, image fingerprinting, machine learning, and we take those tools now that we have that knowledge and we're able to scale at a very high speed of actually finding and removing. And with our partnership with big platforms like Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're able to take those down in hours, right? That's how we help brands.
Why wouldn't the industry be naturally incented to develop the reputation of being the one platform that doesn't really allow much counterfeit to get through? In other words, why wouldn't Amazon just own this space by saying, don't believe any of the upstarts because we spend billions of dollars a year identifying counterfeit, potentially counterfeit transactions, and we've got the seal of approval. Why isn't the industry already doing that, or are they? And they just haven't caught up yet.
Well, I think they are doing it for the brands in which they probably know, and some of the things they don't know they can't do, right?
I know, but it is. I'm gonna finish so Senator Hirano can go to another line of questioning. But guys, we are talking about the titans of technology. We are talking about people who have been proud to identify through analytics, anticipating your next purchase before you even make the decision to do it. So seriously, we can't figure out a way to take the edge off of some of this problem, not all of it. I mean, I can give you countless examples of data analytics where and let me just back up. I came from the high-tech sector. I worked in artificial intelligence in the late 80s. It was a lot less smart back then, but it was still artificial intelligence. It's just remarkable to me. Even when I get into this discussion about notice and takedown of content, creators' content, guys, this has to be a part of your business model. Amazon didn't exist until it became an online book retailer. Now it's just an enormously important, consequential American business. But you've got to take care of some of the ill effects of the very model that made you a billionaire, Mr. Bezos. So, I mean, a part of what I'd like to see here are some industry-led solutions. Mr. Shears, let me tell you, I don't like doing heavy regulation. I don't even like regulations. I've probably been responsible for repealing more regulations than I've ever voted for in my 16, 17 years in public office. But the industry needs to find a role to play here. And it can't be that let's wait for the Inform Act and then maybe we'll come back with feedback on the next tranche if it's not safer. We need industry-led solutions and collaboration here. Because I do believe most of the people, all the people represented at this table are good people. But we've got bad people, particularly the Communist Party of China, who is taking advantage of our lack of progress in this space. And it's costing us economically, and I actually think it's costing us in terms of health and safety. But you have my commitment. My door is wide open. Let's come up with the leanest, most effective approach to protect consumers and hold what I think the historic counterfeiter is, China, accountable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Hirano.
So this is yet again a very, very interesting situation. So I am trying to grasp the need for regulation and what that would look like versus the how we're going to enforce such legislation. So for Mr. Schur, I know you oppose this legislation, at least in its current form. And as I understand it, previous versions of this bill included a mechanism to hold accountable brands that abuse the process by filing multiple false infringement claims. Can you speak a little more about those provisions and whether you would support something like that?
So thank you for that. The previous version of the bill in previous years did acknowledge the fact that we've seen in other contexts that when you create a mechanism to suppress information online, and there is no accountability for misuse of that mechanism, it gets abused. And right now, ShopSafe has no accountability mechanism for misuse of its notice provision. And that is a recipe for disaster. We've seen in other contexts and here in Europe that these mechanisms get misused both by nominally good actors who just don't know what they're doing and bad actors who want to suppress the information that they're complaining about. And here you could easily imagine competitors filing notices about their competitors in a hope to knock them offline. And we don't want to see that happening. We want to have an accountability mechanism in any kind of system like this.
So what kind of accountability system would you suggest
Well,
in the SHOP Act?
Right. So for starters, we want to ensure that brands and platforms are cooperating hand in glove and working together, sharing the information that's needed to eliminate problematic transactions. And that's everything from who is the licensed manufacturer to what are common product configurations that, as Mr. Shapiro is describing, are often non-public information. And so knowing we don't put the stripes on our product in this fashion is valuable information that platforms often simply can't get. And unfortunately, the bill actually affirmatively discourages inter-platform brand collaboration by saying you cannot have a mechanism that requires brands to participate. And obviously, how we structure that can vary, but what we don't want to do is undermine existing brand platform collaboration that's going on today.
Can any of the rest of the panelists talk about the concern about collaborating among brands so that we can get to one of the concerns that Mr. Scherer has?
I think if Shop Safe were to become law, I think you would still have very, very robust brand platform collaboration and cooperation. That's been going on for a number of years, that will continue to go on, regardless of the shifting of the liabilities, because it's in the brand's own interest to continue to make sure that their platform partners are educated. At the same time, the platforms need to avail themselves of the public information that's out there. For example, trademarks are filed with the Patent and Trademark Office, which is what the legislation talks about. So, relying on a U.S. government body that is the central repository of trademarks in the United States, I don't think is a difficult ask, and certainly something that platforms with their incredible technological prowess, I think, would be able to do. I think the key thing, and we keep talking about, should we allow Inform more time to work? Inform's been around for 100 days. The beautiful part about the internet is we already know right now whether Inform is working and bending the curve, and clearly it's not. I mean, I think Mr. Shapiro gave some numbers that have already suggested that that's not the case. What we, I think, probably need to ask ourselves the question is, what is an acceptable level of counterfeits? What's an acceptable level of dangerous counterfeits? How many more people do we want to see injured before we are able to take action? And I think the answer all of us would say is none. We have an opportunity to change the dynamic. Right now, it's a reactive process. We are waiting for bad stuff to happen and hoping the brands can discover the bad things before the consumers get their hands on them. That's literally the mechanism that we have right now. We have to change that. That's not working. It hasn't worked for 20 years. It's not going to work over the next 20 years. Shop Safe, I think, is a very, very reasonable approach to try and change the dynamic, to bend that curve. And, we look forward to working to see it enacted or, modified if necessary to.
So the way that Shop Safe will change that dynamic is by placing the burden, some level of burden on these e-platforms.
Correct. A level of burden on e-platforms to make sure that dangerous products don't get on the platforms and marketed.
Well, I'm for that. Thank you.
Let me just make a brief comment and then turn to my ranking member for any concluding comments. There is a campaign underway now in partnership between the USPTO and the National Crime Prevention Council. It's called the Go For Real campaign, which is trying to protect trademarks and recognize the scale of it. And their comment in launching the next phase of this campaign was that the sale of counterfeit products is a $2 trillion criminal enterprise that affects every industry, causes fires, skin rashes, and even death. And international organized criminals use counterfeits to fund illegal activities like gang violence, child labor, human trafficking. We can debate whether that scope and scale, that number, is accurate. But one of the things Mr. Lamar laid out was that many of the products coming from a wide range of countries, but in particular the PRC, that are faulty, that don't perform the way branded products would, but that actually take advantage of forced labor, sweatshops that are laced with harmful content, are getting into American households through an intersection between brands and online platforms that is not yet as tightly interwoven as we would like it to be. It's exceptionally rare to go to a mall, walk into a Dick's Sporting Goods and buy a bicycle helmet that is fake and that doesn't actually protect you. That almost never happens. We want to figure out a way that doesn't crush innovation, that doesn't shut down the American role in online innovation, but that also realigns some of the incentives in a way that is clear, balanced, and fair, and that provides defensible, articulated safe harbor standards that are in fact safe harbors, that are not overbroad, that are not unreasonable. But I was grateful for the articulation of his posture by my colleague, Senator Tillis. He's not a fan of regulation. I'm a Democrat. We're typically fans of regulation. In this space, I want to make sure that we are not overregulating, but that we are protecting consumers. Both of our households have experienced purchasing counterfeit goods through online platforms. My hunch is if we surveyed every senator, we'd probably find that a significant majority of senators, their own families, have purchased defective goods. The question is, as you put it, Mr. Lamar, how much of this is acceptable? An acceptable trade-off for the remarkable convenience, breadth, and affordability of product offerings that online platforms provide. So with that, I want to say we conducted this as a hearing with genuine interest in your input, both critical and supportive. And I'll read before we conclude a list of the different organizations that have also offered input in writing in advance of this hearing. But before I do so, I want to invite my ranking member to make any concluding comments. Senator?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I don't think we're as far apart as, and really I don't think we're that far apart even based on the face of the discussion here. It's all in the details. And anytime you get into something like this, you could overreach. We don't want to overreach. But for anybody to take the position, it ain't broke or informed may fix it, in the face of the growing numbers and the growing threat, it just doesn't seem rational to me. So the reason that I continue to use the get to the table so that you're not on the table in so many of these intellectual property discussions is that I think the sweet spot is usually somewhere in the middle. You don't want to slow down, and you don't want to hamper our country's dominance in so many areas of innovation. And I mean, we were the innovators in online retailing back in the day. Now it seems old. We want to stay ahead of it. And the only way that we do stay ahead of it is to stay ahead of these threats. And the only way that we're going to make progress is have everybody at the table to inform us of maybe some of the unintended consequences if we go too far. But then maybe also to inform the industry of the real consequences if we don't go far enough. So this is an iterative process. We're going to continue to get people to work together in hearings and in work groups, and we hope that everyone, thanks to the witnesses today who participated, those who are watching, but I invite everybody on either side of this equation to come work with an honest commitment to improving the situation. The status quo is unacceptable. The status quo is going to get worse. We've got to sit here and do something about it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tillis, and I would welcome more input, and we in particular need and would value specific and concrete input about how to improve this legislation. Before we conclude, I'll submit for the record without objection 7 letters we've received from a wide range of stakeholders, both in opposition to the legislation and in support of it, from the PASS Coalition, from Joy Woodruff of Sound of Tri-State, I think that's a Delaware concern, the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers, the Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies, the Vehicle Suppliers Association, the Personal Care Products Council, and the National Association of Manufacturers. I'd like to thank my colleagues who joined us today and asked questions. I'd like to once again thank Ranking Member Tillis and his staff. This is our 5th IP subcommittee hearing of this year. This is, I think, one of the most active and purposeful subcommittees in the entire Senate. I think we've reviewed the fact that the rapid growth of counterfeiting on e-commerce platforms, which matches the very rapid growth in online commerce, raises the challenge of harms of counterfeiting, harms to brands, harms to consumers, and that precipitated our discussion about how the current liability framework does not adequately address the situation. We do not have a final solution yet or a path forward that we can all embrace, but I think ShopSafe is moving us in a good direction, and I look forward to more specific and concrete input from today's witnesses and the other organizations I referenced. If any member wants to submit a question for the record for the witnesses, they must do so by a week from today, by October 10th by 5 p.m. Let me thank again our witnesses for participating and everyone who watched here and online. With that, today's hearing is adjourned.